Is the Barbarian compensating for something with its 4 weapons and 2 massive 2-handed weapons? Is that why they're angry all the time as well? If the Barbarian and their massive amount of weapons is for you, then this is my leveling guide for the Barbarian, plus a really good Hammer of the Ancients build for you to check out. Let's go! This is the last of my class guides, which goes through a build and an overview of all the different classes in Diablo 4. I'll leave a link to that playlist here, and I'm going to start doing some endgame builds. So let me know what you'd like to see in the comments down below. So let's talk about the Barbarian as a whole. Now, their main strengths are really that they have a lot of health, they're super mobile based on their skills, and they can sometimes be more forgiving to play because of that higher health pool and a lot of the damage reduction sort of skills that they can have. But they are extremely melee focused. So that means that, you know, they're often a lot more short range than some of the other classes, and they can take a while to really take off. Like if you pick a Barbarian, you only sort of level it to level 20, it's a vastly different experience to once you get past that point, especially towards the end game, and you get your key passives and start getting some of those legendary aspects, which makes such a huge difference to a Barbarian. Part of the reason that they can be very slow early game is because of their main resource, which is rage. Now, rage generates over time by using, say, your basic skill, or in some other aspects to do with like your legendaries or passives, etc. But for the most part, you'll generate rage just off your basic skill. Now, because of this, compared to a lot of the other classes who have a full resource pool at the start of combat, as a Barbarian, you've got to get to that point. So you need to generate that rage in different ways, which can make them somewhat limiting in the early stages, as you don't have a lot of that option available to you. But rage can be very strong, and because of the requirement actually generated, a lot of the Barbarian skills have heaps of damage potential, especially things like in this build that we're going to talk about today, where we're really focusing on Hammer of the Ancients as a big, massive AoE skill that we're going to dump a lot of our abilities into, plus an ultimate that will summon the different 3 spirits of the Barbarian to deal damage in sort of AoE, as well as help you in those combat scenarios to sort of make sure you're not alone, because as a solo player, as Barbarian, you don't have a lot of companion or help options. It's really just you and your weapons, and the ultimate here really helps with that to summon those agents to sort of fight with you. Or your skills will start with the basic skill here, and we're running Lunging Strike, which we're enhancing, and then grabbing Battle Lunging Strike, so it also inflicts bleed damage. But the basic attacks here and this basic skill is going to be your main attack until you have enough fury to dump into Hammer of the Ancients. But you want to focus on Lunging Strike because it gives you that little bit of a burst, so you can sort of lunge towards the targets, which is really helpful for a melee class like this. It also does good damage, plus the bleeding damage, which comes important a little bit later. But we're grabbing Lunging Strike and then into core skills for Hammer of the Ancients, which is your main damage dealing skill. So this will slam your hammer down and deal X amount of damage in like an AoE around you. We are also grabbing Furious Hammer of the Ancients, so it will deal more damage for each point of fury you had when you use that attack. Now, this being your main damage dealer, you want to use Lunging Strike to build up that fury and then dump that fury with Hammer of the Ancients. Now, moving on to the defensive skill line, we're grabbing Rallying Cry here, which will increase your movement speed and your resource generation to show fury. It also helps the allies if you are running in sort of a co-op situation. Now, you also want to enhance this and grab Tactical Rallying Cry to increase your fury generation when you do have Rallying Cry active, though I wouldn't worry about upgrading it too quickly. You really want to focus on those first 2 skills, Lunging Strike and Hammer of the Ancients, as your first initial skills. Moving down into the brawling line, the key pickup here is War Cry. So War Cry will let out a cry, increase the amount of damage that you deal plus your allies. So again, super beneficial if you're running in co-op, but also beneficial for you because of that damage increase. Now, you want to enhance this to grant you Berserking, as well as grab Mighty War Cry, so it will give you Fortify, which is really beneficial for a melee class like this. Now, there is also some passives here, which is once you get down to sort of the brawling skill that you can start thinking about. Now, I would be grabbing Booming Voice, so your shout skills last longer, as well as Raid Leader if you are especially running in a co-op, because your shouts will then heal your allies as well, and Guttural Yell, so your shouts will cause your enemies to deal less damage, which is actually really important when you're constantly going to be in the middle of your enemies. We're also grabbing a Leap here in the brawling line, so you can grab this to leap forward and slam down. Now, upgrading this to grab Power Leap will increase the amount of fury you have when you actually hit one of the targets, which is the main reason that we're going to use this, not only for a movement skill so you can quickly switch between different locations, but also grabbing that 40 fury so then you can dump it with Hammer of the Ancients. Moving down into the weapon mastery line, there isn't much to grab here other than Pit Fighter and No Mercy. There's a couple of other passives like Thick Skin and Counter Offensive that become a little bit more beneficial later down the line, but I wouldn't worry about spending a lot of my skill points as you're leveling up on a lot of these passives, though I would grab Hamstring because of the class specialization, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Moving on to the ultimate skill, this is going to be Call of the Ancients, to also fit with like our Ancients theme here, but it is sort of unquestionably one of the best ultimates for the Barbarian. Now this will summon 3 different like spirits, which will deal either a upheaval or a whirlwind or a rend on sort of like all the targets around you. When you're just fighting like bosses and elites, this does heaps of damage just to them directly, but it's also really good in group situations where if you've got heaps of enemies sort of on you, popping this will allow you to defeat a lot of them quickly, and you definitely want to upgrade this as well to grab Supreme Call of the Ancients. Moving down to the key passives here, you've got really 2 options. Now, the one that you'll absolutely run if you have no issues generating Fury, which is sort of later down the line as you get to the higher levels, is Unbridled Rage. So core skills deal 135% more damage, but they also cost 100% more Fury. So those core skills being here is Hammer of the Ancients, which is your main damage dealing skill. So giving it 135% extra damage is like super important, but because it costs 100 more Fury, you won't get as many off. Like you will barely get that skill off if you're having Fury generation issues, which you absolutely will be having in the early stages of leveling. So sort of when you get to this point around like the level 30, I'd probably grab like Walking Arsenal or even something like the Gushing Wounds, just until you've got enough of that Fury generation based on your legendaries as well as your passives. And then once you've got that, then go into Unbridled Rage later down the line. There is some passives that you can pick up a little bit later down the line as well, like Heavy Handed, and then there's a couple up at the top of the tree like Endless Fury, so your basic skills will also generate more Fury for 2-handed weapons, which we are using a lot more of as well. There's a lot to pick up here in passives, but I wouldn't worry too much about that other than dumping all of your early skill points into Lunging Strike, Hammer of the Ancients, getting the skills that you need, and then picking up these passives that we've sort of discussed here. But there is definitely a lot of passives for a Barbarian, as they have a lot of damage reduction you can get, as well as Fury generation and movement speed, but definitely focus on the core skills first while you're leveling up. The class specialization for the Barbarian is a little different to most of the other classes in that you'll get most of it just for free at level 5. Once you hit level 5, you unlock the expertise system, but then at level 15, you need to go and do the class quest to unlock the technique. Now, how this works is as you use weapons, you will rank up the specific arsenal set. Now, this will rank up just by having and using that weapon. So if you are looking to rank up a specific type of arsenal, make sure you're using that weapon, and it'll just rank up as you hit enemies and use that sort of a weapon type. In terms of the technique that you should use, really here, it's just the 2-handed sword expertise, and you want to put that in your technique slot. So this will deal direct damage to... So any of the direct damage you deal is inflicted as bleeding damage over 5 seconds. So this will just increase your overall bleeding output, which is not necessarily like a bleed focused build that we're talking about here today, but it does definitely benefit you more than a lot of the other skills in the different expertise line. And then when you grab things like the Hamstring skill, which will add slow to enemies, and then you can also increase the amount of damage you deal to enemies that have, say, immobilized, stunned, or slowed with something like No Mercy because of the increased critical strike chance. You've got that option to not only deal more bleed damage, but also more crits to them, and it just kind of snowballs from there with that bleed damage. For the attributes for the Barbarian, your key focus should be on strength, which will increase your overall skill damage as well as your armor, but the main thing here is that skill damage increase. You really want to focus on strength on any of the gear that you do have. Secondarily, if you see things that have willpower, it's not too bad because of the resource generation here to help you generate some of that rage, as well as dexterity for critical strike chance and dodge chance. But for the most part here, strength is absolutely important, and then if you do see willpower or dexterity, it's not the worst. In terms of your gear and your gems, we'll start with the gems now. For weapons, I'd be putting topaz in as many weapons as you can to increase that basic attack damage, as well as putting rubies in armor for maximum life. And in jewelry, it doesn't really matter too much, but you could put something like skulls to increase your armor, or even diamonds to increase your overall resistances. For legendaries, there's one key legendary, which is the aspect of Astral Force. So Hammer of the Ancients quakes outward, dealing X amount of damage to enemies, and this will just increase the overall radius of Hammer of the Ancients, give it a massive AoE sort of around you. Absolutely critical to go and grab this as soon as you can in the game. And otherwise, like, there's other legendaries that are beneficial that you can definitely pick up, like something like the aspect of the Expectant. So attacking enemies with your basic skill increases the damage of your next core skill by X%, because you're going to use Lunging Strike a lot, and then you get that damage increase when you dump Hammer of the Ancients. And I really like Rapid Aspect for this build. So basic skills gain 15% attack speed, because you will use a lot of those basic attacks. So the faster you can get those off, the faster you can increase your Fury, and then the faster you can get the Hammer of the Ancients attacks out. Moving on to some tips for the Barbarian. Now, as this is a melee focused class, your positioning is super critical because you will take damage as the Barbarian. It is literally unavoidable. Some of the other classes you can get away with it with things like, you know, barriers and just like good positioning, but with the Barbarian, you will take damage. It is an unavoidable fact. Now, because of that, you need to be mindful of those big heavy hitting attacks that elites and bosses deal to you and make sure you avoid those. It's also beneficial to complete some of the region progress to get that potion capacity up, as well as go back to the alchemist to increase the efficiencies of your potions when you hit those level barriers, because you will absolutely use potions constantly during combat as a Barbarian just to keep that health pool fresh and keep it going. You will have some fortify which will help you with that because of some of the passives we talked about earlier, but it's absolutely critical that you do have a good amount of potion capacity as well as potion consistency because of the Barbarian's limit in terms of its abilities to avoid damage. Now, also, it happens with all these classes, but don't imprint any of those legendaries we talked about onto those weapons. I know there's 4 weapon slots, but you're going to replace them all the time because there's constantly better weapons. Put those aspects onto things like the amulets and your rings. Even some of your armor isn't too bad, as you won't replace that as often as your weapons, because you want to replace those weapons constantly when you do get ones that increase your overall damage, because that is sort of your main way of improving yourself as you're leveling up. But that is everything you need to know about the Barbarian. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.